shortly after the crime is actually committed. The number of people who are executed, murderers in Saudi Arabia, in a year, would be equivalent to those who are murders which take place in New York City in a week. I mean, we're talking about vast differences. Whether it is robbery, theft, the variety of different crimes, you find that the difference is enormous. There's also another example which was shown within 6 months after the Sharia, that is Islamic law, was introduced in the Sudan. And at the time, Ja'far Numeri, the ruler, the president, he had released 13,000 prisoners, decreeing that Islamic law was not applied in their sentencing. So there were some 13,000 prisoners were released. In spite of all that, within 6 months of the application of Sharia, they found that crime had decreased by over 40%. This is the proof. Application of Islamic law does have a deterrent effect in the society itself. What we find also with regards to murder, I mean, there's a different approach to it in the Western system, where murder is left up to the state to decide what do we do with this person who's committed murder. Whereas from the Islamic point of view, it's an issue of the rights of human beings, where they have the right to decide. If this person is to be let free, then it's those people who have suffered, the family that has suffered the loss, they're the ones who have the right to decide in this regard. Some Western criminologists, have challenged and have spoken against this change in attitude. For example, Goodhart, in 1953, had stated, "Retribution and punishment is an expression of the community's disapproval of crime. And if this retribution is not given recognition, then the disapproval may also disappear." Very, very wise statement. And it indicates, it's challenging the trend which was taking place in the West. Another legist, Leo Page, had written, "Law exists for the protection of the community. It is not necessary to show that capital punishment is an absolute preventative of murder, or even that it is only a deterrent. If it can be shown that it is more effective as a deterrent than any other punishment, then I shall be satisfied that it should be retained. To hold otherwise is surely to forget the innocent victims of murder in the interest of their murderers. And I have no doubt at all that the fear of the gallows is the most powerful of all deterrents." These are the reflections of some Western legists, in the face of this change in attitude in the West towards punishing murderers. And in fact, over the last 30 years, especially the last 20 years, the application of capital punishment has been reintroduced into most of the states, or many of the states in the United States. And as it's picking up, we find again a new wave, which is spearheaded by the Pope and others, against the application of capital punishment. From this American perspective, where capital punishment is applied in a somewhat arbitrary way, there is some validity to objections raised against it. When studies were done back in the 60s, and it showed that black Americans seemed to be sentenced to death for crimes that white Americans were not. They both commit the same crime, but the chances of a black American being sentenced to death was far greater. So many of them were on death row, greatly disproportionate to their presence in the society and the number of crimes in which they committed. The civil rights movement challenged this issue of application of the death penalty because it seemed to be unfair. And to some degree, this kind of practice continues. So there is an element of reason here for not applying it. But not applying it in this unjust way. But the issue of not applying it to somebody who murders is in fact really an encouragement to murder in the society. Of course, when Islamic law was applied, in any given society, it does not stop what they call crimes of passion. A person out of, just exploding on an instant killed somebody. I mean, no matter what laws you set up, it's not going to stop that person that, who explodes and does that. But it will stop the premeditated murders. It will cut it down. Because when a person is making his plots and his plans, and he thinks of the consequences, if he thinks the consequences are, well, okay, maybe I'll have to go to jail for a few years if they catch me. That's one thing. But now if they think that, hey, I will lose my life if they catch me, then that's another thing. And people who plan do think these things over. And I'm sure that knowing that your life will be taken will cause people to think, a lot of people, to think twice, thrice, etc. But as I said, from the Islamic perspective, when it comes to murder and how the law is applied, there are options. It is not automatic execution, but execution is there. That's the first option. But then there is also diya, that is, where the family accepts that the person pays a compensation for the loss or for the death of that person, then this option is there. And as well as the person may be pardoned. But this is left up to the family, to those who suffer the loss. This is not up to the state to make this kind of decision. So where the family members agree to let somebody off without any punishment, they can do it. Without payment of any fine, they can do it. It's up to them. And this is to allow for circumstances which may happen in the family where the family knows full well, that the father or the son or whatever who was involved in this crime, deserved it. Or they had created a circumstance which precipitated this. Maybe somebody, a relative or some friend or a neighbor or whatever, ended up killing somebody who was goaded into it or something like this. They're the ones who can make that kind of decision. Whereas, as a general rule, the law will be applied swiftly once the evidence is there. But again, the evidence has to be 100%. There cannot be doubt. It's not just a question of fingerprints or a murder weapon. There has to be evidence which is incontrovertible. It cannot be, you cannot find out later on, oh, this was a mistake. No. The law is only applied when it is absolutely sure. As the Prophet Muhammad had said, leave aside the hudud, the fixed laws, whenever there is doubt. This is as far as we can go in this segment of the program, dear viewers, and we hope to continue looking into some issues of the punishments in Islamic law in our coming segments. Thank you for being with us, and I bid you farewell. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.